The night my mate rejected me was the same night every alpha in the kingdom started hunting me. Cold earth pressed into my palms as I knelt at the center of the clearing, the scent of pine and smoke thick in the air, mingling with the sharp sting of humiliation that burned deeper than any wound. Torches circled the mating grounds, their flames flickering wildly as if they too sensed something was wrong. Every pair of eyes in the pack was fixed on me, some curious, others cruel, most indifferent. Above me stood the man who was meant to be my forever, my alpha, my mate, and yet his silence felt heavier than the entire forest. I, Alpha Kale, reject you. The words fell like a blade, clean and merciless, slicing through the fragile bond I had carried in my chest for years. A sharp, invisible force twisted inside me, tearing at something sacred, something I had once believed unbreakable. My breath caught, my chest tightening as though the air itself had turned against me. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by whispers that spread faster than wildfire, and Omega rejected. Of course it would be me. I forced my gaze upward, meeting Kale's eyes, searching for hesitation, for regret, for anything that might tell me this was a mistake. There was nothing. His expression remained carved from stone, untouched by the pain clawing through me. Beside him stood Lyra, perfect, poised, everything I was not. Her hand slipped into his as though it had always belonged there, her lips curving into a smile she did not bother to hide. The bond shattered completely then, leaving behind a hollow ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. A laugh broke somewhere behind me, sharp and cutting. Then another. Soon the clearing echoed with quiet mockery, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be heard. I felt it in the way shoulders turned away from me, in the way elders refused to meet my eyes, in the way even the wind seemed to shift, carrying my disgrace into every corner of the pack. I had always known my place. Born an Omega, raised in the shadows of stronger wolves, I learned early that survival meant silence. I worked harder, stayed quieter, endured longer. I told myself that if I proved my worth, if I remained loyal, if I held onto the fragile hope of the mate bond, things would change. But hope, I realized in that moment, was a cruel thing. "Get up," Kale said, his voice low enough that only I could hear, though it carried no softness, no trace of what we once shared. "You've embarrassed yourself enough." Embarrassed. The word echoed in my mind, dull and distant, as if it belonged to someone else's story. Slowly, I pushed myself to my feet, my legs unsteady beneath me. Dirt clung to my skin, streaking across my arms, grounding me in the reality I could no longer escape. I turned away before anyone could see the tears threatening to fall. But the pain was what broke me. It was what happened next. A ripple moved through the crowd, subtle at first, like a shift in the air before a storm. Conversations faltered. Laughter died mid-breath. One by one, heads turned, not toward Kale, not toward Lyra, but toward me. A strange pressure coiled low in my chest, unfamiliar and unsettling, as though something long buried had begun to stir. My pulse quickened, each beat louder than the last until it drowned out everything else. The scent of the forest sharpened, every detail suddenly too vivid, too intense. I could hear heartbeats, dozens of them pounding around me, overlapping, chaotic. And then silence, not real silence, but something deeper. A pause, as if the world itself had drawn a breath and was waiting. I froze. At the edge of the clearing, beyond the ring of firelight, shadows shifted. One figure stepped forward, tall and commanding, his presence alone enough to draw attention away from everything else. Then another emerged from a different direction. And another. They did not belong to my pack. That much was clear from the way our warriors stiffened, from the way Kale's posture changed, tension creeping into his stance. Alphas, not one, not two more. Their gazes locked onto me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, something far different from the disdain I had endured moments ago. This was not mockery. This was not pity. This was recognition. Confusion twisted through me, sharp and disorienting. I took a step back, instinct urging me to retreat, to disappear, but there was nowhere left to go. The clearing that had once felt vast now seemed impossibly small, every exit blocked by eyes that refused to look away. "What is this?" Kale demanded, his voice cutting through the tension, though it lacked the authority it once held. He stepped forward, positioning himself between me and the strangers, but I could feel it. The shift in power, subtle yet undeniable. They weren't here for him. A low murmur passed between the alphas, words too quiet to catch, but the meaning behind them sent a chill down my spine. One of them moved closer, his gaze never leaving mine, dark and unreadable. "Interesting," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused, though there was something beneath it, something dangerous. My breath hitched. I didn't understand. I was nothing, an omega, weak, unwanted, rejected. And yet the way they looked at me now, it was as if they saw something else entirely. The pressure in my chest flared suddenly, sharp and overwhelming, forcing a gasp from my lips. Heat surged through my veins, spreading outward, consuming every inch of me. My vision blurred, the edges darkening as the world tilted beneath my feet. A whisper brushed against my mind, faint but unmistakable, not broken. I staggered, gripping my chest as the sensation intensified, no longer a flicker but a force that refused to be ignored. Around me the tension snapped, voices rising, movements quickening, but all of it felt distant, secondary to the storm building inside me. "What is she?" someone asked, the question cutting through the chaos. I didn't have an answer. I had spent my entire life believing I knew exactly what I was. But as the ground trembled beneath me and the air crackled with something I could no longer deny, a single, terrifying realization took hold. I was never just an omega. The night my mate rejected me was the same night every alpha in the kingdom started hunting me. A murmur spread through the clearing, low at first, then rising into something sharper, uglier, as the meaning of Kale's words settled into every corner of the pack. The bond that should have tied us together lay in pieces at my feet, invisible yet suffocating, as though I were still choking on what had been ripped away. I forced myself to stand, though my legs trembled beneath me, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. The cold night air brushed against my skin, carrying with it the scent of smoke, damp earth, and something far worse, judgment. Kale did not look at me again. Instead, he turned toward her. Lyra stepped forward with effortless grace. Her silver dress catching the firelight, her posture flawless, her confidence unshaken. She had always moved like she belonged at the center of everything, like the world itself adjusted to make space for her. Where I was overlooked, she was admired. Where I was tolerated, she was chosen. And now, she was everything I had just lost. "True mate stands beside me," Kale declared, his voice steady, carrying across the clearing with the authority that had once made my heart race for an entirely different reason. "Lyra, daughter of the Beta, is worthy of this bond." The word echoed in my mind, hollow and distant, as if it had never once been meant for me. Lyra's gaze flickered toward me just for a moment, and in that brief glance there was no sympathy, no hesitation. Only quiet triumph, carefully masked beneath a polite smile meant for the rest of the pack. She reached for Kale's hand. He did not hesitate. Their fingers intertwined as though they had always been meant to, sealing something in front of everyone that could not be undone. The elders nodded in approval, their expressions calm, satisfied, as if this outcome had been expected all along. A few exchanged knowing looks, whispers passing between them that needed no voice to be understood. Of course, this was how it would end. The crowd began to react more openly now, restraint slipping away as the spectacle unfolded. Some laughed outright, the sound sharp enough to cut through what little composure I had left. Others leaned closer to one another, speaking just loud enough for me to hear fragments of their thoughts. She actually believed he would choose her, an omega dreaming above her place. It's embarrassing to watch. Each word landed harder than the last, piling on top of the ache already tearing through me. I kept my head high, even as something inside me threatened to collapse completely. I would not give them tears. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break in front of them. But humiliation has a way of sinking deeper than pride can protect. Kale stepped closer to Lyra, his presence shifting toward her entirely, as though I had already been erased from his world. The bond we once shared felt like a distant memory now, something fragile and foolish that I had clung to for far too long. "You may leave," one of the elders said, his tone measured, but the dismissal in it was unmistakable. There is no place for confusion during a sacred ceremony. Confusion, as if what had just happened could be reduced to something so small. My hands clenched at my sides, nails pressing into my palms as I forced myself to breathe through the suffocating weight pressing down on me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to disappear into the forest where no one could see me, where no one could remind me of what I had just lost. Yet my feet refused to move, because leaving meant accepting it. Leaving meant admitting that everything they believed about me was true. A ripple of laughter broke out again, louder this time, encouraged by my stillness, by my refusal, or inability to walk away. Even those who had once shown me small kindnesses turned their eyes elsewhere, unwilling to stand too close to my disgrace. Isolation settled in fully then, colder than the night air, sharper than any blade. I had never felt more alone. Lyra leaned closer to Kale, her voice soft enough that it should have been private, yet the silence in the clearing carried it further than she intended. "You made the right choice," she murmured. He nodded, his expression firm, certain, untouched by doubt. "I know." Something inside me cracked at that quiet, final, irreversible, not because he chose her, but because he never hesitated. The realization settled heavily in my chest, pressing down until it was difficult to breathe. I had spent years convincing myself that what we had was real, that the bond between us meant something more than convenience, more than expectation. I had been wrong. A sudden movement at the edge of the crowd drew my attention, though I could not yet understand why. The air felt different again, heavier, charged with something I could not name. The torches flickered more violently, shadows stretching unnaturally across the ground. For a brief moment the laughter faltered. A few heads turned, confusion replacing mockery as something unseen began to shift around us. I swallowed hard, my senses sharpening despite the emotional storm raging inside me. The ground beneath my feet felt unsteady, as though it no longer belonged entirely to this moment. And then I felt it. A pull not from Kale, not from the broken bond that still throbbed faintly in my chest, something else, stronger, older, watching. The whispers in the crowd died completely now, replaced by an uneasy silence that spread faster than the laughter ever had. Even Kale's posture stiffened, his attention drifting away from Lyra as he scanned the clearing, searching for the source of the sudden change. But the pain was what broke me. It was what happened next. The night my mate rejected me was the same night every alpha in the kingdom started hunting me. Before that moment, before the whispers turned into something sharper and more dangerous, I had already learned what it meant to exist at the very bottom of a world built on strength. I was born an Omega, not simply low-ranking, not just overlooked, but marked from the beginning as something lesser, something inconvenient. In a pack where power defined worth, I carried none that anyone could see. While others shifted for the first time under the guidance of proud elders, I remained unchanged, standing on the edges of ceremonies that were never meant for me, pretending that the tightness in my chest was not humiliation. They said my wolf was late. Then they said it was weak. Eventually, they stopped saying anything at all. Silence can be louder than cruelty when it lingers long enough. I learned to fill that silence with usefulness. I woke before dawn to complete tasks no one else wanted, keeping my head down, my movements careful, my presence easy to ignore. I mended torn uniforms, cleaned training grounds after battles that did not include me, carried supplies across distances that left my body aching long after nightfall. I told myself it was enough to belong in small ways, even if I could never stand among them as an equal. Kindness became my quiet rebellion. When others turned away from those weaker than themselves, I stayed. I offered help without being asked, shared what little I had without expecting anything in return. It did not change how they saw me, but it gave me something they could not take, a sense that I was more than the label they placed on me. Still, the whispers followed. They always did. Useless. Hasn't her wolf come? The words were never meant to reach me, yet they always found a way, slipping through cracks in walls, carried by careless voices that never bothered to lower themselves enough to ensure I could not hear. I learned to keep my expression steady, to let their judgments pass over me like wind, even when they settled deeper than I wanted to admit, because a part of me feared they were right. There were moments, late at night, when doubt crept in, quiet and relentless. I would lie awake beneath the dim glow of the moon, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something, anything, to prove that I was not as empty as they believed. That was when the dreams began. They came without warning, vivid and consuming, pulling me into places that felt both unfamiliar and strangely known. I would find myself standing in vast forests untouched by time, the air thick with a presence that made my skin prickle. Shadows moved between the trees, watching, waiting, as if they recognized me even when I did not recognize myself. In those dreams, I was not weak. I could feel it in the way the ground responded to my steps, in the way the wind shifted around me, carrying a power that did not belong to the girl I was during the day. There was a voice, too not loud, not commanding, but constant, like a heartbeat just beneath the surface of everything. It called to me. I never understood the words, only the feeling behind them, something ancient and patient, as though it had been waiting for far longer than I had been alive. I would wake with my pulse racing, the echo of that presence lingering just long enough to make me question whether it had been real. But reality always returned quickly. The cold floor beneath my feet, the familiar walls of my small room, the weight of expectations I could never meet, they reminded me exactly where I stood. And yet there were signs that something was wrong in ways I could not explain. Moonlight affected me differently. While others found strength and clarity beneath its glow, I felt something sharper, more intense, as though it reached into me and stirred something restless. My senses would heighten without warning, sounds growing clearer, scents more defined, until it became overwhelming. I learned to avoid open spaces during full moons, retreating into shadows where the light could not touch me as deeply. It was easier to hide than to explain something I did not understand. There was also the mark. I had noticed it years ago, faint at first, barely visible against my skin. It rested just below my collarbone, a pattern unlike anything I had seen among the pack. At times it seemed dormant, nothing more than an oddity I could ignore. Other times it would burn, soft at first, then sharper as though something beneath it was trying to break free. I never showed anyone. Not because I thought it made me special, but because I feared it made me different in a way that would only confirm their doubts. Different had never been safe, so I carried it quietly, like every other part of myself that did not fit within the boundaries they understood. I told myself I could endure it. I told myself that being overlooked was better than being feared. But as I stood in that clearing, the echoes of rejection still fresh, the weight of years pressing down on me all at once, something shifted in a way I could no longer ignore. The whispers had changed, not the ones from the pack, filled with scorn and dismissal, but something deeper, something that rose from within me, steady and undeniable. It was the same presence from my dreams, the same pull that had haunted me beneath the moonlight, now stronger, closer, impossible to dismiss as imagination. It felt awake. A strange heat spread from the mark on my skin, slow at first, then building, threading through my veins like fire searching for a way out. My breath caught as the sensation intensified, no longer something I could hide or push aside. For the first time, the weakness I had carried for so long felt like a lie. Confusion tangled with fear, tightening around me as the world seemed to tilt, every sound sharpening, every movement around me slowing just enough for me to notice what I had missed before. The way the air had changed, the way the alphas at the edge of the clearing watched me, not with dismissal, but with something far more unsettling, recognition. My heart pounded harder, each beat echoing in my ears as the truth pressed closer, refusing to stay hidden any longer. I thought I was broken, until the night my wolf finally answered. The night my mate rejected me was the same night every alpha in the kingdom started hunting me. I did not wait for permission to leave. The moment the air shifted and those unfamiliar presences closed in, instinct took over, sharp and undeniable. Staying in that clearing meant being watched, questioned, possibly claimed, and I had no understanding of what was happening to me, no control over the force stirring beneath my skin. So I ran. Branches clawed at my arms as I pushed through the forest, the sound of the celebration fading behind me, replaced by the rush of wind and the thunder of my own heartbeat. The darkness swallowed me quickly, but it did not feel as suffocating as it once had. My senses sharpened with every step, the path ahead unfolding in ways that made no sense for someone like me. I should have stumbled, I should have slowed, I didn't. The deeper I went, the stronger it became, that heat, that presence, that voice threading through my thoughts like a pulse I could no longer ignore. It guided me without words, urging me forward, away from everything I had known, away from them. But I was not alone. At first, it was only a feeling, a prickle at the back of my neck, the unmistakable awareness of being followed. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate footsteps that did not try to hide. My body tensed, instincts flaring in ways that felt foreign, and yet completely natural at the same time. They were close, too close. I slowed, my breath uneven as I stepped into a small clearing where moonlight spilled freely through the trees. The silver glow brushed against my skin, and the reaction was immediate. Heat surged through me again, stronger than before, forcing a sharp inhale from my lungs as my vision blurred for a split second. Something was happening, something I could not stop. The mark beneath my collarbone burned, no longer a dull ache but a searing intensity that spread outward, wrapping around my chest, threading down my arms, pooling at the center of everything I was. My fingers curled instinctively, energy crackling just beneath the surface, restless and alive. And then I felt them, not just one. More watching. The shadows at the edge of the clearing shifted, and figures stepped forward one by one, their presence heavy, commanding, impossible to ignore. Each of them carried the unmistakable aura of an alpha, but there was something different in the way they held themselves, something older, more dangerous. They were not here by accident. They were here for me. My breath hitched as their gazes locked onto me, sharp and unyielding, studying me as though I were something they had been searching for. The forest fell silent around us, the tension thick enough to taste. I took a step back. None of them moved to stop me, not yet. One of them broke away from the others, stepping into the light with a confidence that drew attention without effort. He was taller than the rest, his presence heavier as though the very air bent slightly around him. His eyes fixed on mine, dark and intense, holding a weight that made it difficult to look away. There was no hesitation in him, no uncertainty, only recognition. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, his voice calm, controlled, yet edged with something that sent a chill down my spine. I swallowed, forcing my voice to steady despite the storm building inside me. "Neither should you." A faint shift crossed his expression, not quite amusement, not quite surprise. Behind him, the other alphas remained still, their attention never wavering, their silence far more unsettling than any threat. The heat inside me flared again, sharper this time, sudden and overwhelming. I gasped, my hand flying to my chest as the energy surged outward without warning. The ground beneath my feet trembled faintly, leaves rustling though no wind had passed through. My vision sharpened unnaturally, colors deepening, shadows stretching until everything felt too vivid, too real. I could hear their heartbeats, steady and strong, could sense the tension coiling in their muscles, the way their instincts reacted to mine. This was wrong. I wasn't supposed to feel this. The alpha in front of me took a step closer, his gaze narrowing, not in suspicion, but in something far more dangerous, understanding. "Look at me," he said, his tone shifting, quieter now, but carrying an authority that slipped past my defenses before I could stop it. I did. And that was when it happened. The energy inside me snapped into place, no longer scattered, no longer uncertain. It surged upward, flooding through me with a force that stole the breath from my lungs. My eyes burned, the sensation sharp and sudden, as though something behind them had awakened after years of silence. The world stilled for a heartbeat, everything froze. Then his expression changed, not with fear, not with doubt, but with certainty. "That's impossible," one of the alphas behind him murmured, the words barely audible, yet heavy with disbelief. The one in front of me did not look away. "You're not an Omega," he said, each word deliberate, final. The statement struck harder than any insult I had ever endured, not because it hurt, but because of how deeply it resonated with something I had been trying to ignore. My breath came faster now, uneven, my pulse echoing in my ears as the truth pressed closer, undeniable, terrifying. Everything I had believed about myself was unraveling. Everything they had told me I was no longer fit. The heat in my chest steadied, no longer chaotic but controlled, waiting for me to understand it. Around us, the other alphas shifted subtly, their attention sharpening, their presence closing in without a single step forward. They had seen it too. They had felt it. Whatever I was becoming, it mattered, more than I could comprehend. The forest felt different now, no longer a place to hide, but something that responded to me, something that recognized the change before I fully grasped it myself. I had spent my entire life trying to fit into a role that never belonged to me. And now, standing in the center of something far bigger than I understood, surrounded by those who saw me not as weak, but as something worth pursuing, worth claiming, worth fearing, that's when I realized I was never just an omega. The night my mate rejected me was the same night every alpha in the kingdom started hunting me. The forest did not feel like an escape anymore. It felt like a boundary closing in, as though every path I took led deeper into something I could not outrun. The alpha standing before me had not moved, yet his presence filled the space between us, steady and unyielding, as if he had already decided I wasn't leaving without him knowing exactly what I was. And that terrified me more than the one still hidden in the shadows. A sudden sharp ache tore through my chest, stealing my breath in a way that had nothing to do with the power building inside me. It was different, familiar, unwanted. The broken bond. Even shattered, it still lingered like a wound that refused to close. For a brief moment, something pulsed through it, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Awareness. Somewhere far behind me, Cale had felt it. I didn't need to see him to know the shift that must have crossed his face, the confusion that would follow, the doubt creeping into a certainty he had just declared before the entire pack. The connection may have been severed, but whatever had awakened in me had brushed against it just enough to leave a mark. He would be looking for me now, not out of care, out of need to understand what he had lost. The thought barely settled before the air changed again. The alphas surrounding the clearing exchanged glances, subtle but loaded with meaning, as though something unspoken had just been confirmed between them. One stepped forward, then another, their movements slow, deliberate, their attention fixed entirely on me. "She's the one," someone said quietly. The words carried more weight than they should have. "A rare wolf has awakened." The phrase echoed in my mind, though no one had spoken it aloud here. It traveled faster than footsteps, faster than reason, slipping through the invisible channels that connected packs across distances I could not imagine. What I had felt inside me moments ago was no longer contained. It had been noticed. And now it was spreading. My pulse quickened, unease tightening in my chest as I realized the truth of it. This wasn't curiosity drawing them in. It was instinct. The alpha closest to me studied my face, his gaze sharp, calculating, as though he were piecing together something fragile and dangerous all at once. "You don't even know what you are, do you?" I didn't answer, because I didn't. The heat surged again, stronger this time, rising too quickly for me to steady it. My breath hitched as it spilled outward without warning, a wave of energy that rippled through the clearing like a force breaking free from its restraints. The ground beneath us cracked. Not violently, not enough to cause real damage, but enough to send a visible tremor through the earth, enough to make every alpha in that space stiffen in unison. I stumbled back, startled by my own reaction, my hands shaking as the energy continued to flicker unpredictably beneath my skin. I hadn't meant to do that. I hadn't even understood what I was doing. "You need to control it," the alpha in front of me said, his voice sharper now, though not unkind. "I don't know how," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. That was the truth I could not hide. Another alpha moved closer, perhaps testing, perhaps curious, his expression less guarded than the others. "If she can't control it, she's a risk." Words stung more than it should have. A risk. Before I could respond, before I could even process the shift in his tone, something inside me reacted. Instinct, raw and unfiltered, surged forward, colliding with the fear I had been trying to suppress. The energy snapped. It burst outward again, faster this time, more precise, striking the alpha who had stepped too close with a force that sent him staggering back several steps. He caught himself quickly, but the shock on his face mirrored the silence that followed. I froze. I hadn't touched him. And yet I had. My breath came faster, panic threading through me as the realization settled in. This wasn't something I could hide anymore. It wasn't something I could pretend didn't exist. It was dangerous. The alpha in front of me moved without hesitation, stepping between me and the others, his body angled slightly as though shielding me from them, or shielding them from me. "Enough," he said, his tone low, final. They listened. That alone told me everything I needed to know about him, but his protection did not come with trust. I could see it in the way his shoulders remained tense, in the careful distance he kept between us, close enough to intervene, far enough to react if I lost control again. His eyes flicked to my hands, then back to my face, measuring, assessing, deciding. "You're coming with me," he said. It wasn't a question. A flicker of defiance rose in my chest, brief but strong. "I'm not yours to command." For a moment, something shifted in his expression, something almost like respect, though it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "No," he agreed quietly. "But if you stay here, you won't get a choice in who claims you next." The word claim settled heavily between us. It changed everything, because I could feel it now, clearer than before, the way the other alphas watched me, the way their attention lingered not just with curiosity but with intent. This wasn't about finding me anymore. It was about possessing me. A chill ran down my spine, sharp and immediate. The forest no longer felt like a place to hide. It felt like a battlefield. I hesitated, caught between fear and something else I couldn't quite name, something that pulled me toward him despite the warning instincts screaming in the back of my mind. His presence was steady, controlled, grounding in a way that made the chaos inside me feel quieter. That frightened me too, because it meant I was already responding to him. Our eyes met again, and this time the moment stretched longer than it should have, charged with something unspoken, something that neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge. He looked away first. "Move," he said, though the edge in his voice had softened just slightly. I turned, stepping past him, aware of how close he was now, aware of the way his presence seemed to follow, not suffocating but constant. Behind us, the others did not interfere, though I could feel their gazes linger, could sense the unspoken tension that had not yet been resolved. This was far from over. As we moved deeper into the forest, the weight of everything pressed down on me all at once. The broken bond, the awakening power, the alphas who now knew I existed. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the trees, beyond the safety I had once believed in, the world was shifting in response to something I could not control. And for the first time, the truth settled in fully, undeniable and terrifying. I wasn't just being hunted, I was being claimed. The night my mate rejected me was the same night every alpha in the kingdom started hunting me. By the time the sun rose, I was no longer the girl who had knelt in the dirt and begged a bond to stay intact. Something inside me had shifted too far to return, something that refused to be silenced again, no matter how much fear tried to keep it contained. He took me beyond the borders of any pack I had ever known, into territory that felt older, untouched, as though it answered to no one and nothing except the laws that existed long before titles like Alpha or Omega were ever spoken. The air there carried a different weight, dense and alive, pressing against my senses in ways that made everything sharper, clearer, impossible to ignore. "You feel it," he said, not asking, his voice cutting through the quiet as we stopped near a clearing where the ground dipped slightly, forming a natural circle. I didn't answer immediately, but the truth was undeniable. The energy within me, once chaotic and unpredictable, no longer thrashed wildly. It pulsed, steady, waiting. I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. He studied me for a moment, his gaze unreadable, as though measuring how much of what I felt I actually understood. "Good," he said finally. "That means it hasn't consumed you yet." The way he said it sent a chill through me. Expression didn't change. Power like yours doesn't stay dormant forever. It either bends to your will or it breaks you. The words settled heavily, but instead of fear taking over, something else rose to meet them. Determination. I had spent too long being defined by weakness, too long accepting limits that were never meant to be mine. "I won't let it break me," I said, more firmly this time. A flicker of approval crossed his face, subtle but real. "Then prove it." Training began without ceremony. There were no gentle instructions, no gradual introductions. He pushed me immediately, forcing me to confront the very thing I had been trying to suppress. At first, it was overwhelming. Every attempt to draw on that power sent waves of energy crashing through me, uncontrolled, unpredictable, leaving me breathless and frustrated. "Stop fighting it like it's separate from you," he said sharply after one failed attempt left the ground scorched beneath my feet. "It is you. I clenched my fists, frustration burning just as fiercely as the energy I was trying to control. If it's me, then why can't I command it? Because you still think like an Omega. The words hit harder than anything else he had said. For a moment, anger flared, sharp and immediate. But beneath it there was something else, truth. I had spent years shrinking myself, conditioning my instincts to retreat, to submit, to survive by staying small. That instinct didn't disappear just because my power had awakened. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe, to feel instead of resist. The energy responded differently this time, no longer crashing against me but moving with me, flowing through every part of my body as though it had always belonged there. When I opened my eyes again, the world looked different, sharper, clearer, alive in a way I had never noticed before. Again, he said, this time when I reached for it, the power came without resistance. It rose smoothly, coiling through me, steady and controlled. The air around us shifted, subtle but undeniable, as though acknowledging something that had finally aligned. He didn't interrupt, he watched. And when I released it, not in a burst of chaos, but in a measured, deliberate wave that rippled outward without destruction, the silence that followed felt heavier than any praise. That's it, he said quietly. Something inside me settled at those words, not fully, not completely, but enough to know that I was no longer at the mercy of something I didn't understand. I was learning, I was changing, and the world was noticing. News of me spread faster than I could have imagined. By the second night, whispers had turned into movement. Packs that had once ignored my existence now sent scouts to confirm the rumors. Alphas who had never stepped beyond their territories began crossing borders without hesitation, drawn by something stronger than protocol, stronger than caution. A rare wolf has awakened. They were no longer asking if it was true, they were asking where I was. And they were willing to fight for the answer. He did not hide that from me. They're coming, he said, his voice calm, though his posture had shifted, more alert now, more guarded. Not all of them will be patient. I didn't need him to explain what that meant. By the time the first group arrived, I could feel them before I saw them, their presence pressing against the edges of the territory like a storm waiting to break. They stepped into the clearing without hesitation, their confidence evident, their intentions clear. One of them spoke first, his gaze fixed on me with open interest. So it's true. I didn't respond, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer felt the need to justify my existence. Another alpha moved forward, his tone smoother, more calculated. You don't belong hidden out here. Come with me. My pack will give you the place you deserve. The offer wasn't kind, it was strategic. Before I could answer, a third voice cut in, sharper, more impatient. You're wasting time. She should be claimed before someone else takes the chance. The word claim echoed again, but this time it didn't settle over me the same way. This time it sparked something else. I stepped forward, not back. The movement alone was enough to shift the atmosphere, subtle but immediate. Their attention sharpened, their postures adjusting, as though they had expected hesitation and found something entirely different instead. I'm not something you can divide between you, I said, my voice steady, carrying further than I intended. The silence that followed was brief. Then one of them laughed, low and dismissive. You think you have a choice? The question hung in the air, heavy with challenge. For a moment the old instinct stirred, the urge to retreat, to avoid confrontation, to survive quietly. But it didn't take hold. Instead, something else rose to meet it. I let the power surface, not violently, not uncontrollably, just enough. The air shifted, the ground beneath us responding with a faint tremor, a quiet warning that carried more weight than any display of force. Their expressions changed, not dramatically, but enough to show that they felt it, understood it. I held their gaze unflinching. I do, I said. The difference was immediate. Respect, cautious and reluctant, replaced the earlier assumptions. They didn't step back, but they no longer stepped forward either. The balance had shifted, not completely, but enough to change the way they saw me, not as something weak, not as something easily taken, but as something they needed to approach carefully. Behind me, I could feel his presence, steady, observant, but no longer tense in the same way. He wasn't stepping in, wasn't interfering. He was letting me stand on my own. And for the first time I did. Days passed, and the encounters became more frequent, more intense. Some came with offers, others with threats, a few with silent intentions that required no explanation. Each time I met them differently than I would have before. I did not lower my gaze. I did not step aside. I did not accept what they tried to decide for me. And each time I refused, each time I stood firm, the shift grew stronger. The girl they would have dismissed no longer existed. In her place stood something they could not easily define, something they could not ignore. Word reached my old pack eventually. Of course it did. Kale came himself. When he stepped into the clearing, the past seemed to press in for a brief moment, memories of who I had been colliding with who I was becoming. His gaze found me immediately, shock flickering across his face before it was replaced by something else. Regret. "I didn't know," he said, his voice lower than I remembered, less certain. I held his gaze, but the ache I expected didn't come. "I did," I replied quietly. "You just didn't look." The truth landed between us, final and unchangeable. He took a step closer, hesitation threading through his movement. "Come back," he said. "We can fix this." Fix. As if I were something broken that needed to be restored. I shook my head slowly. I said, the word carried more weight than any rejection he had given me. Something in his expression faltered, the realization settling in that whatever control he once held over my life was gone. And not just from him, from all of them. Around us, the other alphas watched, silent, assessing, witnessing the shift that had fully taken place. The balance had changed, not just in power, but in presence, in the way I stood, the way I held myself, the way I no longer sought permission to exist. For the first time, they weren't looking down on me. They were bowing. The night my mate rejected me was the same night every alpha in the kingdom started hunting me. Power changed the way the world looked at me, but it did not quiet the storm inside my chest whenever he stood too close. By then, I had learned how to hold the energy without letting it tear through everything around me, how to command it with a steadiness that felt almost natural. The ground no longer cracked beneath my feet without reason, and the air no longer trembled every time my emotions shifted. I had become something they could not ignore, something they approached with caution instead of contempt. And yet, when it came to him, control felt different. He did not treat me like something fragile, nor did he attempt to dominate the space around me the way other alphas did. His presence remained constant, measured, as though he understood that pushing too hard would only make me pull away. He watched more than he spoke, stepping in only when necessary, allowing me to find my footing in a world that had never been built for me. That should have made it easier to trust him. It didn't. Because every time our eyes met, there was something there I couldn't fully read, something deeper than curiosity, sharper than interest. It lingered in the silence between words, in the way his attention never wavered when I moved, as if he were tracking more than just my actions. As if he were trying to understand what I meant to him. That unsettled me more than open ambition ever could. "You're holding back again," he said one evening, his voice cutting through the stillness as we stood across from each other in the clearing that had become our training ground. I frowned slightly, lowering my hands as the energy I had been gathering dissipated into the air. "I'm controlling it." "You're restraining it," he corrected, stepping closer, his gaze steady. "There's a difference." A flicker of irritation rose, quick and sharp. "And letting it loose is better. It's not about letting it loose," he said, stopping just within reach, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence, close enough that the space between us felt charged. "It's about trusting that it won't consume you." Trust. The word settled uneasily in my chest. "I trusted someone once," I replied quietly. It didn't end well. Something shifted in his expression then, subtle but real. Not pity, not dismissal. Understanding. "I'm not him," he said. "I know," I answered, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "That doesn't mean I won't make the same mistake again." The truth lingered between us, heavier than anything else we had spoken aloud. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, without warning, he reached out. His hand closed around my wrist, not tightly, not forcefully, but with enough certainty to draw my attention completely to him. The contact sent a sharp awareness through me, my senses heightening instantly, the energy beneath my skin responding as though it recognized something significant. "Feel it," he said, his voice lower now, steadier. I did. The power didn't surge wildly this time. It moved differently, aligning with the rhythm of something outside of me, something grounded, controlled. His presence did not suppress it, nor did it challenge it, it steadied it. My breath slowed, the tension easing just enough for clarity to take its place. For the first time, the energy didn't feel like something I had to fight or restrain. It felt balanced. I looked up at him, something unspoken passing between us, something that neither of us seemed willing to name. And that was when it became dangerous. Because connection, no matter how controlled, no matter how careful, always came with risk. I pulled my hand away. The moment broke instantly, the space between us widening again, though the echo of it lingered longer than I wanted to admit. "We don't have time for this," I said, turning slightly, creating distance that felt necessary even if it left something unresolved. His gaze remained on me, unwavering. "For what?" "For confusion," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "For distractions." His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes now, something sharper, more deliberate. "You think that's what this?" Didn't answer, because I wasn't sure. Before he could press further, the air shifted, not subtly, not gradually. It changed all at once, the weight of it pressing down on the clearing with a force that made every instinct I had sharpen instantly. My attention snapped toward the edge of the forest, where movement broke through the shadows without hesitation, more alphas, not the ones who had approached before with curiosity or measured intent. These carried something different: urgency, aggression, purpose. "They found us," he said quietly, though there was no surprise in his tone. Of course they had. Power like mine was never going to remain hidden for long. They stepped into the clearing with confidence, their presence immediately filling the space, their attention locking onto me with a focus that left no room for misunderstanding. One of them spoke first, his voice carrying authority that rivaled even the one beside me. "This ends now." I didn't move. "Does it?" I asked, my tone calm despite the tension tightening around us. His gaze narrowed slightly. "You've caused enough disruption. Whatever you are, you don't belong unclaimed." It was again that word, but this time it didn't stir fear, it stirred defiance. "I don't belong to anyone," I said, the energy beneath my skin responding to the certainty in my voice, rising just enough to make the air around us shift. A low murmur passed between them, subtle but telling. They felt it, they understood it, and they wanted it. Another stepped forward, his expression less controlled, more impatient. "You don't get to decide that." Before I could respond, the alpha beside me moved, not stepping in front of me, not shielding me, but positioning himself at my side. The gesture was small, almost insignificant, but it carried weight. It said he wasn't claiming me. But he wasn't leaving me to face them alone either. Tension coiled tighter. "This isn't your territory," one of them said, directing the words at him. He replied evenly. "But she is under my protection." Protection, not possession. The distinction mattered. But it didn't change what they wanted. The air grew heavier, the balance tipping dangerously close to something that could not be undone. Power pressed against power, unseen yet undeniable, each of them testing boundaries without crossing them, yet. And in the center of it all, I stood between choices I could no longer avoid. I could feel it clearly now. The path that led toward him, steady, controlled, something that offered balance but demanded trust I wasn't sure I could give. The path that led toward power, unrestrained, absolute, something that would ensure no one could ever stand over me again, but might cost me everything else. And beneath both of those, the quiet, lingering pull of something darker, revenge, the memory of kneeling in the dirt, of being dismissed, discarded, reduced to nothing in front of everyone who had ever known me. I could make them feel that, every single one of them. The energy within me responded to that thought instantly, rising faster, sharper, as though it welcomed the idea. He noticed, of course he did. "Careful," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "That path doesn't give anything back." I swallowed, the weight of the moment pressing in from all sides. Every choice carried consequences. Every step forward would close another door behind me. And for the first time since everything had begun, uncertainty returned. Not from weakness, but from the understanding that power alone did not decide who I would become. I had to. The clearing held its breath. They were waiting. He was watching. And I stood at the center of it all, knowing that whatever I chose next would define everything that followed. If I chose wrong, I wouldn't just lose him. I'd lose myself. The night my mate rejected me was the same night every alpha in the kingdom started hunting me. By the time the final confrontation came, the forest no longer felt like neutral ground. It felt like a stage, every shadow waiting, every breath measured, every movement carrying weight far beyond the moment itself. They gathered without invitation. One by one, then in groups, until the clearing that had once held only silence and training became crowded with power. Different scents layered over each other, sharp and commanding, each alpha carrying his own authority, his own claim, his own intention. Some stood with quiet calculation, others with open challenge, but all of them watched me, not as something weak, not as something forgotten, but as something worth fighting over. The shift would have been impossible to imagine only days ago. And yet here I was, standing at the center of it, no longer shrinking, no longer searching for a place to belong. They adjusted around me instead. The alpha beside me remained still, his presence steady, though I could feel the tension coiled beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't threatened easily, but even he understood what this gathering meant. This was no longer curiosity or negotiation. This was a line being drawn. "You've drawn too much attention," one of the alphas said, stepping forward, his voice cutting through the quiet with deliberate authority. "This ends now." Few others shifted at his words, not in agreement but in readiness, as though each of them had already decided how far they were willing to go. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch, let the weight of their expectations settle before I moved. When I finally stepped forward, the ground beneath me answered faintly, not violently, but enough to remind them and myself that I was no longer standing here empty. "You keep saying that," I said calmly, my voice carrying further than it ever had before. "But none of you seem willing to walk away." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Because none of us are foolish enough to ignore what you are," another alpha added, his tone sharper, less patient. "Power like yours doesn't exist without consequence." "Aware," I replied, holding his gaze without hesitation. The tension tightened. They wanted control, they wanted certainty. And I was giving them neither. Before anyone could push further, a new presence cut through the clearing, familiar in a way that made something in my chest tighten. Not with pain, but with recognition of a past that no longer held the same power over me. Kale. He didn't hesitate as he stepped into view, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed entirely on me as though nothing else existed. The moment he appeared, the dynamic shifted again, subtle but undeniable. A few of the alphas glanced his way, measuring him, assessing his place among them. He ignored them, his attention remained on me. "I'm ending this," he said, his voice steady, though there was something beneath it now, something less certain than before, something closer to desperation. A quiet murmur moved through the clearing. I tilted my head slightly, studying him, taking in the differences I had not noticed before. The confidence he once carried so effortlessly had cracks now, small but visible, like something he could no longer fully hold together. "You already tried that once," I said. The reminder landed harder than any accusation. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "That was before I understood." "What?" I asked, my tone even, though the energy beneath my skin stirred faintly, reacting to the tension building around us. "That you're not what they think," he replied, stepping closer, ignoring the subtle shift from the others as he moved into the center of something far more dangerous than before. "You belong with me." The words might have held weight once, now they felt hollow. A few of the alphas reacted immediately, their stances shifting, their attention sharpening at the implication behind his claim. One of them let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You lost that right the moment you rejected her," he said. Kale's gaze flickered briefly, but he didn't back down. "The bond was real. Not enough for you to keep it," I answered softly. Silence followed, heavy, unavoidable. For a moment the past pressed in, memories of who I had been colliding with everything I had become. The girl who would have waited for him, who would have accepted whatever scraps of affection he offered, who would have believed that belonging meant enduring. She didn't exist anymore. I stepped forward. The movement alone was enough to draw every eye back to me, every conversation, every challenge, every claim pausing in its place. "You don't get to come back now," I said, my voice calm but carrying something final beneath it. "Not after you made your choice." His expression shifted, something breaking through the control he had been trying to maintain. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air, unexpected, heavy with meaning, but it didn't change anything. "I know," I replied, and that was all. The simplicity of it seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever could. He took another step closer, reaching out slightly, as though he could close the distance between who we had been and who we were now. The energy reacted before I did. It rose instantly, not violently, but firmly, creating a barrier he couldn't cross, invisible yet undeniable. He stopped, his hand hovering just short of where I stood, the realization settling in as he felt it. "You can't fix this," I said quietly. Behind him, the other alphas watched, their attention sharper now, their interest shifting. This was no longer about whether I could be claimed. This was about whether I could be controlled at all. The answer was becoming clear. One of them stepped forward, his tone measured. "Enough of this. She's made her stance clear." "She?" Another challenged, his gaze narrowing slightly. "Or is she still deciding who she aligns with?" The question lingered, pulling the focus back to me, forcing the moment into something more than confrontation. A choice. I felt it again, stronger this time. The pull of power, steady and absolute. The presence beside me, controlled and grounding. The lingering shadow of what had been taken from me. Whispering of justice, of balance, of something that could still be reclaimed in a different way. Every path stood open. Every consequence waiting. I let the silence stretch. Let them wonder, let them wait. Then slowly, deliberately, I stepped forward, past Kale, past the space where my past had tried to hold me, into something entirely my own. "I don't belong to any of you," I said, my voice steady, carrying across the clearing with a certainty that left no room for doubt. "And I'm not choosing today." A ripple moved through them, subtle but immediate, not rejection, not acceptance, something else. Recognition that whatever I was becoming could not be forced into their expectations. The alpha beside me didn't move to stop me, didn't try to speak for me, didn't claim what wasn't his to claim. But when I glanced at him just briefly, I saw it. He understood. That made it harder, because part of me wanted to choose him, not out of weakness, not out of need, but because something in me responded to him in a way that felt right. And that was the most dangerous feeling of all. A distant sound broke through the moment then, low, faint, but unmistakable. Not from any of the alphas present, not from the forest itself, something beyond it, something larger. The shift was immediate. Every alpha in the clearing felt it. Heads turned, postures tightened. The air changed again, heavier than before, carrying a warning that had nothing to do with rivalry or claims. Something else was coming, something none of them had expected. My breath slowed, the energy within me responding not with chaos, but with awareness, as though it recognized the approaching presence in a way I didn't yet understand. The mark beneath my collarbone burned sharply, brighter than it ever had before. A memory surfaced, not mine, not entirely, fragments of something older, something tied to the very power now awakening fully within me. A truth I had only begun to uncover. I lifted my gaze, meeting theirs, feeling the shift settle into place completely. They had come for me, they had fought over me, they had tried to define me. But none of them had asked the one question that mattered. What was I becoming? The answer lingered just out of reach, vast and dangerous, something that stretched far beyond packs, beyond bonds, beyond everything they understood. And as the distant sound grew louder, as the forest itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what was about to arrive, I finally understood one thing with absolute clarity. They all wanted me. But none of them knew the truth about what I was becoming.